Welcome back to Take Care Time, the tales and the exhales of caregivers. I'm your host, Beverly Nance. Last time we met Sharon and Martin. 9 months into Martin's decline from Parkinson's disease, with Sharon running herself into the ground in service of a medication schedule so precise it left no room for her own body's quiet warnings. A chest tightness she filed under stress. A backache she filed until later. A promise to call her own doctor that kept sliding week after week off the edge of an already impossible calendar. Today, someone from outside the house finally notices. Let's pump the brakes for a second before we get there, though, because I want to tell you a little more about her. Her name is Gracie, and she knows exactly what she's looking at because she has lived it herself. Gracie Delgado has lived across the street from Sharon and Martin for 11 years. She was 66 years old, recently retired from 30 years as a school librarian, and she had, over the past decade, developed a particular kind of neighborly attentiveness that comes naturally to people who spend their careers noticing which child in the room needs something before that child knows how to ask for it. She noticed things. She hadn't noticed, for instance, that the neighbor's mail had been collecting in small overflow piles for the better part of 2 months, visible through the little brass door of their mailbox, when the sun hit it at a certain angle in the late afternoon. She hadn't noticed that Sharon's car, once gone reliably by 8 each weekday morning for the commute to the furniture company, had not left the driveway in longer than Gracie could specifically account for. She had noticed that the porch light, which used to switch off promptly at 10 each night, had taken to staying on well past midnight, sometimes until the morning. A small persistent glow that Gracie found herself watching from her own darkened bedroom window more nights than she would have admitted to anyone. And she noticed 6 weeks ago, Sharon standing at the end of the driveway, retrieving the recycling bin, wearing what appeared to be the same cardigan Gracie had seen her in 3 days running, her hair pulled back in a specific unbrushed way of someone who had stopped looking in mirrors, longer than she had stopped doing much of anything else just for herself. Gracie noticed every single one of these signs because 6 years earlier, she had been the one wearing the same cardigan 3 days running. Gracie's husband, Walter, had been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's at the age of 61. She had cared for him for 6 years. The first 2 years had been what she now, with considerable clarity of hindsight, called the manageable years. Walter forgetting words here and there, occasionally lost on a familiar drive, frightening in a way that the first crack in a foundation is frightening, but not yet the kind of crisis that reorganizes an entire life around it. The last 4 years had been something else entirely. Gracie had given up her part-time work at the school library reference desk. She had stopped attending her book club, her watercolor class, her standing Thursday lunch with 3 friends that she had known since her own children were in elementary school. She had slowly, and then all at once, become a person whose entire identity collapsed in a single function: keeping Walter safe, keeping Walter fed, keeping Walter from wandering out the door in the middle of the night in his pajamas, which had happened twice, each time producing a specific and lasting terror in Gracie's chest that she knew, even now, felt echo faintly when she heard a door close unexpectedly in her own house. She remembered the exhaustion with a precision that surprised her. She remembered ignoring a lump in her own breast for 4 months because there was, quite simply, no available morning to schedule a mammogram around Walter's day program hours. She remembered her own doctor calling twice to ask why she had missed her annual physical, and Gracie promising both times to reschedule it, and both times not doing it. She remembered with specific and lasting shame the day her daughter had finally sat her down and said gently, but without any room for negotiation, "Mom, if something happens to you, what happens to Dad?" That question had terrified Gracie in a way that little else in 6 years of caregiving had managed to, because she did not have an answer. Walter had passed away 2 years ago in a memory care facility. Gracie had finally, exhaustingly agreed to when her own body began sending signals she could no longer file under later. She still grieved him, but she had also, in the 2 years since, done a great deal of thinking about what she had wished someone had done for her back when she was the woman in the same cardigan 3 days running. She wished someone had knocked on the door. So, on this particular Tuesday, watching Sharon at the mailbox from her own front window, Gracie sat down, the mug of coffee she had been holding, walked to the kitchen, and began pulling ingredients for banana bread out of her pantry, with the specific determination of a woman who had decided, finally, to become the neighbor she once needed. Sharon opened the door to find Gracie standing at the porch, holding a foil-wrapped loaf, still faintly warm, and wearing the particular expression of someone who has rehearsed what she is about to say, and is determined to say, regardless of how it is received. "Banana bread?" Gracie said, holding it out. "I made too much. I always make too much. Walter used to say I bake like I am still cooking for a family of 6. Sharon took the loaf with the slightly startled gratitude of someone unaccustomed lately of anyone bringing her anything at all. "That's so kind of you," Sharon said. "Thank you." There was a pause, the particular pause in a conversation that one person intends to extend and the other person is prepared to let in politely at the threshold. Gracie did not let it in at the threshold. "Do you have a few minutes?" she asked. "I would love to come in for a cup of coffee." "It has been too long since we've really talked." Sharon hesitated. Behind her, faintly, the particular sound of Martin's mid-morning television program drifted from the living room, and somewhere in her mind, Sharon was already calculating the 40 minutes until his next medication, the physical therapy appointment at 1, the laundry that needed folding, the countless small threads of a day that did not, on the surface, leave visible space for a cup of coffee with a neighbor. But there was something in Gracie's face, not pity, which Sharon had learned to detect and deflect with practiced efficiency over the past 9 months. Something else. Recognition. "Sure," Sharon heard herself say, somewhat to her own surprise. "Come in." They talked at first about ordinary things. The unusually warm weather, a new restaurant that had opened 2 streets over, Gracie's grandson, who had just started kindergarten, and had strong, frequently expressed opinions about the injustice of nap time. Then Gracie sat down her coffee cup, and her tone shifted, gently but unmistakably, into something more direct. "Sharon," she said, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to know before I ask it, that I'm not asking as someone who is judging you. I'm asking as someone who has been exactly where you are." Sharon's hands went still around her coffee cup. "I cared for my husband Walter for 6 years," Gracie continued. "Alzheimer's. And there was a period, probably about the same 9 months you are in now, where I stopped taking care of myself so completely that I nearly lost my own health right alongside him. So," she let that sit for a moment. "When did you last see the doctor?" Gracie asked. Not unkindly, simply directly, the way you ask a question you already suspect you know the answer to. Sharon opened her mouth to say the sentence she had practiced so many times now that it emerged almost without participation. "I'll call and I'll get something scheduled." She stopped herself. Something about Gracie's face made the practice sentence feel, for the first time in 9 months, insufficient. 14 months, Sharon said instead, quietly. "Maybe longer, honestly. I stopped counting a while back." Gracie nodded, slowly, without any visible surprise or alarm, which Sharon found unexpectedly to be the most disarming response possible. Not shock, just recognition. I went 19 months once, Gracie said, before my daughter finally sat me down. I want to tell you something I learned the hard way, and I hope you will let me say it, even though we don't know each other all that well yet. Sharon nodded. You cannot pour from an empty cup, Gracie said. I know that's the phrase everyone uses, and I know it has become such a cliche that it barely registers anymore. But I want to tell you what it actually means in practice, because nobody explained it to me clearly enough when I needed to hear it. It means that your body does not wait for a convenient moment to fail. It fails on its own schedule, completely indifferent to Martin's medication timing or your physical therapy appointments or anything else on your calendar. And if it fails badly enough, while you are the only person keeping your household running, Martin does not just lose a wife who is temporarily unavailable. He loses everything, all at once, with no warning, and possibly no one positioned to catch him. Sharon felt something tighten in her throat that had nothing to do with the chest pain she had been quietly monitoring for weeks. I know, she said very softly. I know that. There's never a good time to stop and deal with yourself. There's always something more urgent. There will always be something more urgent, Gracie said. That is precisely the trap. The urgent things will never stop generating themselves, which means the only way to get out of the trap is deciding on purpose that your own health gets to be urgent too. Not eventually urgent, actually urgent. Today urgent. Before we go any further, let's slow down here for a minute, because I realize that we've been talking about Martin's Parkinson's for 2 episodes now without ever really explaining what the disease actually is. And I think some of you deserve that context. Whether you are caring for someone with Parkinson's yourself or simply trying to understand what Sharon is managing every single day. Parkinson's disease is a progressive neurological condition. It develops when nerve cells in a particular region of the brain, the substantia nigra, begin to break down and die, which reduces the brain's production of dopamine, a chemical messenger that helps coordinate smooth, controlled muscle movement. As dopamine levels drop, movement becomes harder to control. The 4 hallmark symptoms are tremor, usually starting in the hands or the fingers, often most noticeable at rest, rigidity, a stiffness in the limbs and the trunk, bradykinesia, which I'm probably pronouncing wrong, which simply means slowness of movement, and the particular deliberateness you have heard me describe in the way that Martin sits his coffee cup down, and postural instability, difficulty with balance that tends to appear in the disease's later stages. Parkinson's affects 1 million Americans, with roughly 90,000 new diagnoses made in the United States every year. It is, importantly, not just a movement disorder. Many people with Parkinson's also experience cognitive changes, sleep disturbances, mood changes including depression and anxiety, and the kind of fluctuating clarity that I described in Martin, where some days are simply clearer than others. There is currently no cure, but there are effective treatment medications that help manage dopamine levels, physical and occupational therapy, and in some cases, surgical interventions that can meaningfully improve quality of life for years, sometimes decades, after diagnosis. If you are caring for someone with Parkinson's or living with it yourself, I want to point you toward 2 organizations that I think do genuinely good work. The Parkinson's Foundation operates a free helpline at 1-800-4PD-info. That's 1-800-473-4636, offering patient education, connections to local chapters, and a national network of what they call the Centers of Excellence, specialized care centers for people with Parkinson's and the people caring for them. Secondly, the Michael J. Fox Foundation, founded by the actor Michael J. Fox after his own diagnosis with young-onset Parkinson's. It's the largest nonprofit funder of Parkinson's research in the world, and they offer extensive patient and care partner resources at michaeljfox.org, including a care partner guide, but specifically for people in insurance position. I will put both of these in the show notes for anyone who needs them today. Martin's disease is not simply the backdrop of this story. It is a real, common, deeply challenging condition, and if his experience in this series resonates with your own family's experience, I want you to know there's real support that exists, and you do not have to navigate this without it. Let's talk about the hidden cost of solo caregiving for a moment, because I think what Gracie is naming is something research on caregiving has studied extensively, and I want to give it a fuller picture. Caregivers who provide care without meaningful backup support, what researchers often call solo caregivers or caregivers without respite, show worse health outcomes than caregivers who have even modest, regular breaks built into their caregiving arrangement. This is not a small statistical nuance. Studies on caregiver respite consistently find that even relatively brief regular breaks, a few hours, a single afternoon, produce meaningful reductions in caregiver stress hormones, improved sleep quality, and significant lower rates of the depression and anxiety that chronic unrelieved caregiving strain tends to produce. And yet, respite is one of the most underutilized resources, not because caregivers do not know it exists, but because arranging it requires exactly the kind of bandwidth time and mental energy that caregivers in Sharon's position have the least of. It becomes its own kind of trap. You are too depleted to arrange the very support that will relieve your depletion. This is precisely why Gracie's specific kind of intervention, someone from the outside of the household noticing, showing up, and taking on some of the arranging herself, matters so enormously. Sharon did not need someone to tell her that respite exists. She needed someone to help her actually access it, because she genuinely did not have the capacity left to organize it herself. That evening, after she left Sharon's kitchen, Gracie did something that she had quietly been considering all afternoon. She went home, sat down at her own kitchen table, and pulled out the small address book she kept despite owning a smartphone, a holdover habit from a long time of being a person that people called when they needed something organized. Several years earlier, before Martin's decline had accelerated, Sharon had mentioned her daughter Kimberly during a conversation at a neighborhood barbecue. Army, currently stationed overseas, a source of quiet, constant worry that Sharon rarely discussed, but that Gracie had noticed, the way she noticed most things, in the small tightening around Sharon's eyes whenever deployments or news of certain regions came up. Gracie remembered with the specific clarity of a former school librarian's memory that Sharon had once given her Kimberly's email address back when the neighborhood had organized a care package drive for deployed service members 2 winters ago. She found it in her address book in her own careful handwriting. She sat looking at it for a long time. This was, she understood clearly, a significant overstep. Reaching out to Sharon's own daughter without Sharon's knowledge to raise concerns about Sharon's health was not a small or casual thing to do, but Gracie thought about her own daughter's face 6 years ago, asking her the question that had finally broken through 19 months of denial. Mom, if something happens to you, what happens to Dad? She thought about what it might have meant if someone, anyone, had asked Gracie's own daughter to ask that question sooner. She opened her laptop and began to write. Kimberly was 29 years old, a logistics officer currently deployed at a forward operating base where the days ran together in a rhythm entirely disconnected from the seasons back home. She called her mother every Sunday without fail, a standing appointment she had maintained through 3 deployments, and considered in a particular way that deployed service members organize their emotional lives, one of the small fixed points that keep the rest of the world from feeling entirely unmoored. On these calls, Sharon always sounded fine. Not just fine in the reassuring, deliberate way people say fine when they do not want to worry someone far away and unable to help. Fine in a way that Kimberly found 4,000 miles away had no reasonable tools to question. How's Dad doing? Kimberly would ask. Oh, you know, Sharon would say. Good days and bad days, but we're managing. How are you holding up, Mom? Kimberly would ask. Every single week with genuine concern that had, over 9 months become something close to worry she had learned to carry alongside everything else deployment required her to carry. "I'm fine, sweetheart," Sharon would say. "Don't you worry about me. You focus on staying safe over there. That's the only thing I need from you right now." And Kimberly, 4,000 miles away, surrounded by specific demands of her job that left little room for extended personal crisis management, had done the only thing available to her. She had believed her mother, because what else was there to do? Gracie's email arrived on a Wednesday, during one of the narrow windows Kimberly had for personal internet access. It was careful and kind and direct in a way that Kimberly would later describe to her commanding officer when requesting emergency leave as the most important email she had received in 3 deployments. "Dear Kimberly," it began, "my name is Gracie Delgado. I am your parents' neighbor, and I hope you will forgive me for reaching out this way, but I care about your mother so much, and I am concerned about her in a way I do not think she is telling you." Gracie described what she noticed: the mail, the car, the porch light burning through the night, a cardigan worn 3 days running, 14 months since Sharon had seen her own doctor. "I know your mother is telling you she is fine," Gracie wrote. "I understand why she does that. I told my own daughter I was fine for 19 months when I cared for my husband, and I meant every single time I said it, because in some exhausted survival mode part of myself, I believed it was true. It was not true, and I do not think your mother's version of fine is true either. I am not writing to alarm you unnecessarily. I'm writing because I think you deserve to know, and because I think your mother needs more support, and she needs more support than she is currently allowing herself to accept. And sometimes that kind of support has to come from the outside, because the person inside the situation has lost the capacity to ask for it herself." Kimberly read the email twice. Then she sat very still, in a particular fluorescent hush of the base's small communications room, feeling something she recognized distantly as fear. The specific kind of fear that comes from realizing you have been reassured by someone who no longer has the resources left to accurately assess their own situation. She thought about every Sunday call for the past 9 months. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Don't worry about me." She thought about how completely she had believed it, because believing it had been so much easier than the alternative, and because there had been genuinely nothing she could have done from 4,000 miles away, even if she had suspected otherwise. Okay, let's slow down here for a moment, because I think this particular dynamic, a family member providing long-distance emotional support to a caregiver while deployed or otherwise unable to physically be present, deserves its own real attention. Military families navigate caregiving crises with an additional and often underappreciated layer of complexity. When a family member back home is providing full-time caregiving for another relative, the deployed service member frequently becomes what researchers in military family stress call the absent monitor, someone emotionally invested and genuinely concerned, but structurally unable to observe, verify, or intervene in real time. This creates a particular kind of helplessness that compounds the already significant stress of deployment itself. Kimberly could not simply drive over and see for herself. She could not accompany her mother to a doctor's appointment or arrange in-home help with a single afternoon's effort. Her only source of information was her mother's own voice on a Sunday phone call, filtered through Sharon's exhausted determination to protect her daughter from one more thing to worry about while deployed. This is precisely why community support, neighbors, extended family, local friends becomes so critical in caregiving situations involving a deployed or geographically distant family member. Someone needs to be the eyes on the ground when the people who love the caregiver most cannot physically be there. Gracie became the person for Kimberly, entirely without being asked, because she recognized something in Sharon that words on a phone call could never fully capture. Gracie did not stop with the email. Over the following week, she made a series of quiet, deliberate phone calls on her own. She called Deborah, 3 houses down, who had mentioned once at a black party that she had recently retired from nursing and missed having somewhere useful to put her energy. She called the Hendersons, whose teenage son had been looking for odd jobs around the neighborhood, and asked if he might be willing to help with Sharon's yard work and grocery runs for a modest weekly fee. She called her own church's caregiving support committee, a small group she had relied on herself during Walter's decline, and asked whether they might be willing to organize a meal train for a family that, as far as she could tell, had been quietly managing entirely alone for 9 months. None of this was dramatic. None of this required anyone's permission in any formal sense, though Gracie was careful in every conversation to frame it gently as neighbors looking out for neighbors rather than an intervention imposed on a family that had not asked for one. By the following Saturday, when Sharon opened her front door to find Deborah standing on the porch with a casserole dish and a genuinely warm offer to sit with Martin for 2 hours so Sharon could finally get to that overdue appointment with Dr. Fenwick, Sharon stood in the doorway for a long moment, feeling something complicated move through her chest that was not quite relief, not quite grief, not quite gratitude, but some combination of all three that she did not entirely have words for. "I don't understand," Sharon said. How did you know I needed—" "Gracie mentioned you might need a little help," Deborah said simply, "so here I am." Let me say something before we close today, and I want to say it as plainly as I know how. Asking for help is not a failure of caregiving. It is one of the most important skills a caregiver can develop, and it is also, I recognize, one of the hardest, because caregiving so often trains us to believe that needing help ourselves is somehow a betrayal of the person depending on us. Here is what I want you to think about today. If you are the Sharon in this story, the one who has told everyone fine for so long that the word has nearly lost its meaning, I want you to consider letting one person, just one person, pass that word. Let them see what fine actually costs you. And if you are the Gracie, the neighbor who has noticed something, the friend who suspects the fine you are being told is not quite true, I want you to consider knocking on that door, bringing the banana bread, asking the direct question, gently, with the specific authority of someone who has been there. Sometimes the person drowning cannot call the lifeguard themselves. Sometimes someone on the shore has to notice and wade in anyway. Next time on Out of Order, Sharon finally sits in Dr. Fenwick's exam room, and Kimberly, granted emergency leave, begins a long journey home, carrying 9 months of unanswered worry and determination to see with her own eyes exactly how her mother is really doing. Before I let you go, let me mention the Take Care Time respite box. If you are the Sharon right now in your own life, someone who has not let anyone pass the word fine any longer than you can comfortably admit, this box exists as a small, tangible reminder that you are allowed to receive care too. The current respite box is available at takecaretime.com. That's takecaretime.com. Have you had a Gracie in your life, someone who noticed what you were not saying out loud and showed up anyway? Or have you been the Gracie, watching someone you care about disappear into caregiving, wondering how to knock on that door? I want to hear from you. You can reach me at podcast@takecaretime.com. That's podcast@takecaretime.com. We would love to feature you in a future story. Please note that this episode features reenactments and dramatized details. While in most cases the exact verbatim dialogue may not be known, all dramatizations are grounded in thorough research and crafted to honor the stories shared. To respect the privacy and confidentiality of individuals involved, names and some identifying details have been changed. This episode and all content of Take Care Time, the tales and the exhales of caregivers, are protected by copyright and may not be reproduced, distributed, or reused without written permission. Until next week, take care.